What's up, Packer fans? I'm Nariah Chapik, host of Portland Packers podcast. Thank you for being here, and thank you for checking out this video. The 24 Packers roster is officially in the books, at least the initial 53 roster. We're here to break it all down, and there are some surprises across the board. Grab yourself a drink. It is time to pour ourselves another Packers podcast. All right, so we're just gonna let you're gonna stay there for a little bit. You're just gonna sit there with your buddy. We're gonna start off. I just want to start off real quick. We had some success here on TikTok in the last week where I went to bed late, posted a video, and it's small time for us, right? But 1,500 views. I woke up the next morning. Some of our videos are carrying 4,500 views. So I think moving forward, I'm going to try and post something on TikTok every day. And then these videos will still post on Thursday mornings, but I'm going to do a couple sneak peeks on Wednesdays. So I'd encourage you kind of go back and forth a little bit. Check out our TikTok channel. It's probably going to be our secondary, at least what I believe will be our secondary source of clips and footage and stuff that we talk about. And then, of course, our Facebook page. But if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. I'm not going to talk anymore about it. What the hell are you holding in your possession? There's a joke.
It's a
You said there was a joke attached to it.
Last week I came to realize that pretty much every episode, because of the technical issues that we've had on my side of things, pretty much every episode, either in recording or in the description of the video, we have said, please bear with us. We're working through some technical issues. So I figured I would bring a bear with us. We have a bear with us now.
So we're game planning what we want to do for our regular weekly content, and I noticed you brought up weekly dad jokes into your description. Is that what you that what you had in mind for your weekly dad joke?
No, honestly, that was just at the end of the episode last week after recording. I was like, we say bear with us like every week. Maybe I should have like a little Packer bear. But the dad joke things, I've got a lot of dad jokes. So I'd be happy to give a dad joke of the week.
I got a dad joke
on our podcast here. Oh, I'm ready for it.
What do you call a football team without a kicker?
The Minnesota Vikings.
Well, that would be a close second because our starting kicker for the 2024 season is former kicker Greg Joseph. So that's not how I was going to start this podcast, but it's a good way to segue into it. Biggest thing, obviously, on Tuesday, roster predictions came out. We're not predictions. They were out. We started getting headlines or notifications on Tuesday about what they were doing at quarterback. We're definitely going to dive into that a little bit. And then later on Tuesday, we got to see the full breakdown. I will ask you this. I'll start with you. I mean, I know what my biggest surprise was from these roster cuts that took place over the last 24 hours. Would you say it was your biggest surprise looking at the roster breakdown and the moves and who stayed, who's gone, what happened? What's the one that's sticking with you the most right away?
Well, so as far as roster cuts, as far as guys being released, technically, the Kalen King, rookie cornerback, I was pretty surprised that he didn't make the 53-man roster. But ultimately, the one that, and it really wasn't a cut or
just more of a
guy getting released.
What was your big headline, like out of everything that happened?
Yeah. I mean, the AJ Dillion going to potentially season-ending IR was super surprising to me. I mean, we knew that he was dealing with some sort of injury. I remember hearing it described as a stinger, which he dealt with last season. In my experience, a stinger isn't something that knocks you out for a season necessarily. So it'd be interesting to hear what exactly he has going on. So that was super interesting that he's placed on IR, which he doesn't take up a roster spot in that situation, but then they also aren't releasing him. He's still with the team, but just not taking up a roster spot. I know Rob Demoski, the Packers beat writer, he kind of gave his prediction on what the roster would look like at the end of the day Tuesday. And he actually predicted that Marshawn Lloyd would start on IR, short-term IR to start the season, which would make way for Dillion to have a roster spot. Basically, reverse situation, but it doesn't sound like Marshawn Lloyd's going to start on IR, so his hamstring issue must be getting better. But obviously, Dillon's injury is more in depth than anybody knew. So that was pretty surprising to me. Outside of that, the kicking,
Don't take them all.
you know,
Don't take them all, Christian.
well,
You
hey,
take Dillion.
I'm sorry, I'm excited.
Dillon's your headliner, though.
I'm excited.
That's what you'd say, right? And
Yeah, I think so.
it's a little bit. I mean, there's a very small chance that he can make the team still. And what I mean by that is the Packers they can place 2 on a injury reserve to return. They use one of those on Jonathan Ford. They still have 1 remaining. The fact that they did not use that on Marshawn Lloyd is a promising thing. To your point, that means that the Packers feel rather confident that he could play. Early reports right now, and we'll get more into once we see some player interviews and coach interviews. I'm sure Matt LaFleur will talk on Wednesday, and so much of what we talk about right now will probably be irrelevant. But one of the things that stood out is they feel pretty confident that Marshawn Lloyd should be back and should be able to play. We haven't seen him at all in preseason, but there is one spot that they could place a player or transition a player through the end of the day Wednesday, or 4:00 on Wednesday, and they could move Dillion over to that if they feel like he can come back. But I don't think that's the case. I think they would have done that initially. Pretty interesting. I would say that is a huge headline. I made multiple kind of calls that maybe Dillion doesn't belong on the roster, but I didn't think he would go out this way. I think that's probably the most surprising thing for me. It's his second stinger in 9 months. And those things can last a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. And it's not exactly a very fun thing to live with or deal with. And the Packers have always erred on the side of caution when it comes to players' health and safety. And it kind of seems like they're taking the long road with this one, long-term season-ending injured reserve. What that means for his future, we could definitely debate later on in this podcast, but definitely a surprise coming out of there. And we're going to go position by position throughout this podcast. So hang tight, folks. We're going to go quarterback, running back, all of the positions. But I just want to hit our highlights so far from our initial reactions from the roster breakdown. Mine would be kicker, because you were gonna transition into that, so I didn't want you to take that one away from me.
Wait.
Obviously, there's a lot to talk about the quarterback situation, but when it comes to the kicker,
Yeah.
I was adamant these last 4 weeks that we've kind of fired this thing back up and had our shows that Greg Joseph was going to have to take steps in the right direction, or severely outdo or greatly outdo Anders Carlson when it comes to this kicking competition. And it's been neck to neck the entire preseason. Pretty much, Carlson will have a good day, and then Joseph will have a good day. And it kind of go back and forth. And really, as we talked in last week's episode, Joseph was the one that was struggling the most here in this last 7 to 10 days. Yeah, Carlson misses a kick in Saturday's game against the Ravens, but I always felt like if it was going to be a coin toss, that Carlson would get the benefit of the doubt in this situation. That it was a guy that they drafted last year. His brother is a successful kicker out in Las Vegas. I just kind of felt like if it's 50-50, give the guy another couple weeks, couple months, whatever the case may be. But no, it seems like they're going with Joseph. And I say seems because I'm going to make a bold prediction right now. Would not be surprised. I'll say it this way. I would not be surprised if Joseph is not the kicker either by the start of the regular season or by the bye week. I think that they are going to kind of wait to see what happens around the league over the next couple days. I mean, if you're taking Joseph over Carlson, it's just kind of, it's got to be a coin flip. And I don't know what their long-term goal is, but yeah, he's got no job security whatsoever. Greg Joseph has no job security. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the next couple of weeks and months play out. All it takes is, a bad game here or there. You lose a game by a field goal or a missed extra point, and I would not be surprised if they're shopping. He's probably the one guy on the 53-man roster who's got to be more nervous than anyone else. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I've said it before in our previous episodes. I've said just the throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, neither of them has really stood out or done very well. And I said it before, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in someone else at some point, whether it was during training camp or during the regular season, which again, Packers beat writer Rob Domofsky, he made a comment. He had a post about the whole roster, and he had little comments about each position. And I think he worded it perfectly. He said that Joseph is right now the kicker, but how long is his leash? How long or how much do they trust him?
Right.
As soon as there's blood in the water, I don't think the Packers hold back from going out and finding somebody. And that's another thing that I read, waivers, the waivers system. I don't know how exactly it all works, but these guys that just got released from the Packers and from all these other teams can scoop them up before the Packers bring them back to sign them to the practice squad or something like that. So even tomorrow, we may see the Packers bring in another kicker to compete right away with Joseph and see if that's something that if we can snag someone that has performed better than Joseph did throughout training camp.
Well,
So that'll be interesting to watch.
and I think they have one already. So this Alex Hale guy that they brought onto the roster a few weeks ago, he's part of that international pathway program that the NFL has set up where each NFL team is allowed to bring in someone internationally. And then, typically you can have 16 players on your practice squad, but if you have one of those international players, that gives you an additional 17th person. So they brought him in a few weeks ago. I anticipate when it comes to these practice squads and teams retaining players and whatnot, more times than not, these squads, these teams are going to probably cherry pick from their own people that they've got to see for the last 4 weeks and watch and bring them back to their roster. Maybe there's a couple onesie twosies that really stand out that another team's going to pick up. But I would venture to guess that Alex Hale, who has been kicking pretty well, I guess in relation to the other two, he hasn't been any better or any worse, but he's kind of been right in line there. I'd imagine he'd make that practice squad spot. We'll kind of see how that goes, but yeah, it's. I don't know if you're going to see any great kickers that kind of come off of that get cut by any of these teams. I think a lot of it's not even that the USFL and the arena football, those types of kickers. I think a lot of those would have been snatched up or claimed already. So it's going to be definitely interesting to see. It's one position. Like I can get past the whole quarterback room because you hope that you never even have to worry about it. But a kicker is something that we're going to have to deal with every week potentially, and that's one of those positions where it's really eye opening. I didn't think that they would take Joseph, and I once we saw the Packers cut both Carlson and Pratt, I'm like they're just going to cut both these kickers too and go out and find someone else. But I guess ultimately they felt like they're going to roll the dice on Joseph. And Packer fans, those of you watching right now, we're going to be holding our breath. We're definitely going to be holding our breath on field goals and extra points. I don't know. He's got the veteran background, but he was not that good at Minnesota. I didn't really like him as a Viking, and it's going to be nerve wracking for sure.
I think it's certainly possible with these waivers or other kickers that have been cut from other teams. I think it's certainly possible that we find the guy. It's not. It's happened before. I believe, not 100%, but I believe the Atlanta Falcons kicker. I had to look it up because I don't know how to pronounce his name, or I didn't know his full name. Young Ho Koo, I think.
Yes.
He's currently their kicker, but I believe I read an article that he was cut by some other team, and the Falcons picked him up, and now he's been their kicker for the last, probably 3, maybe 4 seasons, and he's been one of the better kickers in the league. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we
telling me there's a chance.
You're saying there's a chance. I am saying there's a chance. There's always a chance. Sometimes the team's not the right fit. Sometimes it's not the right atmosphere, and a guy goes somewhere else and shines. So who knows? It's certainly possible. But
what atmosphere could possibly be better than that of Lambeau Field?
None.
I mean, if you can't make it, it's kind of like New York. If you can't make it there, you can't make it anywhere.
Right. Wasn't it? I think I saw something come out that Lambeau was
you can make it to the
voted like the best football stadium in the country or best football venue in the country or something recently.
By like Yahoo Sports or something like that.
Yeah.
Don't fact check us. All right. We're just
right. Yeah. Don't fact check. We're just reading stuff and be like, oh yeah, I think I read this somewhere. I have no resources. I can't cite any sources on what I'm saying.
All right. So I'm going to pull up. I thought I had it all queued up, but apparently I don't. So what I want to do, let's just pull up. This is from Packers.com. And this is their official webpage where they broke down who the players are that made the roster, who was released, kind of gives us a position by position. So, I mean, right off the bat, let's start with QB, the most important position, arguably, in the entire roster. Not much of a debate, actually. So, Monday evening, afternoon, whatever you want to call it, we started getting those notifications that Packers were trading their future seventh round pick in the upcoming draft to the Tennessee Titans to pick up Malik Willis. I'm going to let you, I mean, I'm going to cue you up for this one because I don't really know a whole lot about Malik Willis. Just in some of our talkings, it sounded like you were a little bit more educated. From what I have heard, it sounds like he was put
Slightly.
into, what was he, a third round pick, I believe, in a draft a couple of years ago, 2021, 2022 draft. Doesn't have much of an offensive line down there in Tennessee, has struggled to produce and obviously be the guy. So Titans go out and get Will Levis, I think is who they picked up in this last year's draft. The Packers decided to jump on that opportunity and give up a pick I guess as a result, Packers decided to move on from both Clifford and Pratt. Kind of a shocker. That would be my second overall shocker. And why I didn't make it number one, and like I mentioned before, is that ultimately we didn't see backup quarterback at all last season. And if we're going to be successful and make a run this upcoming season, we're not going to have to hopefully worry a whole lot about backup quarterback. But regardless, we lose Sean Clifford, we lose Michael Pratt, Pratt being one of the draft picks from this last class. I guess what can you tell us about Malik Willis? Is there anything you know that you could maybe share about the guy? Because again, he's going to get that quarterback two spot. He's going to have to learn the system awfully quick, and he's going to be that fallback guy if Jordan Love has to go out for a series or two or a game or two. You think he's going to be a guy that we can count on?
I don't know if I can right now say that he's a guy we can count on. His history with he was drafted by the Titans. His history with the Titans is not very good. I was meaning to do this before recording, but didn't have time to get to it. So I wanted to look up his career stats. So 2022 and 2023. In 22, he played 8 games, had no passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. QBR was 13.3 that season. Pretty abysmal in those 8 games. 2023
Great.
wasn't much better. He appeared in 3 games. Yeah. I mean, the stats don't look good.
No, they
I
don't.
do remember when he was a rookie, as far as from a fantasy football perspective, I remember when he took over the starting role. I can't remember if it was because of an injury to Ryan Tannehill or what brought him in back in 2022. But I remember the prospect of him coming in as a rookie and his skill set. He's a bigger quarterback. He's more of a rushing threat than a lot of other quarterbacks are. So that aspect of his game is appealing. Rushing quarterbacks always have that extra edge that defenses have to kind of pause a little bit because they know the guy can run. So that aspect of his game is promising. I'm not sure
Do you
what.
know anything about this guy, or did I just put you on the spot like in false pretenses?
I don't know a whole lot. No,
And that's
I don't
fair.
know
That's perfectly
a
fine.
lot in depth. I mean, like I said, I knew of him. I remember specifically back in 22 when he took over the starting role. I remember looking at him from a fantasy perspective, looking at picking him up for my fantasy team because of the potential. I remember looking at him and being like, maybe maybe he maybe he's the guy and blows up right away, but that's really about all I know about him.
Behind Tannehill.
Again, I was going to yeah, he was stuck behind Tannehill, and then like you mentioned, they drafted Will Levis, and Levis kind of took over last year and will be their starter again this year. So he was in a perpetual backup role there as well.
So I think, I mean, maybe if there's a takeaway, if any, is that you bring in a guy that has similar statistics or I guess a play style, or maybe they're currently at the same playing field would be the best way to word it, between Pratt, Willis, and Clifford. But Willis, obviously, being a third round pick, has pretty much I'm looking at the stats, and there's a couple of games where he threw more than 10, 15 passes. So I'm guessing for the most part, the games he played in, he was in that primary of a backup role or was coming in and whatnot.
Mhm.
So maybe they feel like they can get them, to your point, as you said earlier, with, getting someone into the right team and the right atmosphere. Maybe the Packers feel that they can bring this guy in. It's going to be a little bit more upside than what we've seen out of Clifford for the last year, and just hopefully can develop this guy to be that type of player that we want. But I, I don't know how much time we need to spend on the backup quarterback. What we have is, it was just a shock. If anything, we were tracking and just waiting for Clifford and Pratt, one of these two guys, to step up, to step forward.
Mhm.
That second preseason game was abysmal. The third one was not much better. There's, it's just nobody wanted to take the reins and run with it, which was surprising. Maybe that has something to do with the talent that was on the field and who they were playing with, but ultimately, that's how the cookie crumbles in the NFL. Neither player stepped up, and I think the most surprising thing was Clifford, because Clifford looked good last year. He had a good preseason, but had a pretty good offseason too. But training camp was down immediately. Rumor is, or I guess early reports are, that Clifford will be the one that they bring back to the practice squad, which is equally a head scratcher because you kind of know what you got out of Clifford. I feel like Pratt probably has a little bit more of a unknown ceiling to him, but I guess that's the direction the
Yeah.
Packers are going. The first of many shocking moves on roster day is that we have a backup quarterback on the 53-man roster who didn't show up, or he wasn't part of our training camp whatsoever. He just slid right in right at the end and found himself a roster spot.
Yeah. Maybe that's why, maybe like you said, they know what they've got with Clifford. Maybe that's why they would want him for the practice squad guy. Because practice squad isn't necessarily, I mean, sometimes guys move up from the practice squad, but ultimately they are there to give the first team offense the best look possible to prepare for the next week's game. So maybe because they know what they've got in Clifford, they have confidence that he can give the number one defense a good look in practice. So
I guess in the way too early prediction category, do you think we draft a quarterback before round 5 in the 2025 draft?
before round
Yep,
5, I mean, off the cuff, yeah, yeah, I can see that.
I would think so. Like a late 4th round, 5th
Yeah,
round quarterback. I think you take something like that because it's an important position.
or first round,
Yeah,
whatever.
I think we're it's time. Let's start developing first round talent and go. Oh my gosh. You want to
Yeah,
see me lose my shit? That would definitely do it. Down in the old running back.
they're not that
I
stupid.
know. Down in the running back category, here you have it. So a lot of talk about who was going to be behind Josh Jacobs in the running back competition. We've discussed AJ Dillon going on injured reserve. Marshawn Lloyd seems as though he's going to be a healthy option in Brazil in less than a week now. So, oh my gosh, that's coming up quick.
Mhm.
Emmanuel Wilson, making his way to the roster. He was obviously the workhorse throughout preseason with Jacobs, Lloyd, and Dillon out. So he got a lot of opportunity to go out there and prove himself. He shows up to be that third running back on the roster. Any other commentary, thoughts when it comes to the running back room before we head to the wide receivers?
No, we've pretty much already touched on everything here. It is good to see Emmanuel Wilson make the roster. He earned it through the preseason. He earned that roster spot, I would say. And it obviously with with the injury, it worked itself out for him to get onto the roster. I mean, if AJ Dillon's healthy, I don't know that Wilson makes the roster like this, but
Right.
worked out, and I'm glad to see him there.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the first week or two of the season. This isn't a depth chart by any means, but I would imagine Emmanuel Wilson is looking like he's going to be that RB2. He's going to get a lot of opportunity in the first week or two of the regular season because
Yeah,
we just
sure.
have,
With Lloyd being injured
right.
and
He
not playing in the
hasn't
preseason.
really
Yeah.
practiced, hasn't played in the preseason. I mean, yeah, he's got a lot of talent, and I'm excited to see him go and grow and everything that comes with that. But I'd imagine Wilson's going to get the bulk of the assisting roles when it comes with Jacobs. And furthermore, Jacobs, those of you, I mean, I don't play fantasy football. Where does Josh Jacobs rank though on the fantasy? What are you seeing? Where do you see Josh Jacobs landing in these leagues?
So right
His
now
stock had to have gone
in
up
most
with Dillion being out and having nobody back behind him.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure it crept up a little bit. I mean, on average, he's going, oh, somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd round of fantasy drafts usually. I've I read a lot of commentary and analysis on fantasy football and fantasy football drafts and stuff like that, and I have read a little bit about some analysts are down on him because of the season he had last year, Vegas. So there are some people saying that he shouldn't be drafted as high as he is in the average fantasy draft. But as I've talked about before, it's last season kind of is an anomaly for him because of the situation that he had in Vegas. Teams stacking the box against him because Vegas didn't have a quarterback to throw the ball. So I foresee him having a much better year than he did last year. Does he lead the league in rushing again like he did 2 years ago? Maybe not, but I don't think we see the same production as last year. I think we see a step up from that. So so yeah, it'll be we didn't get to see much of him in training camp or preseason game, so it'll be interesting to see that first week, especially against that Eagles defense. Eagles have had a pretty strong rush defense for quite a while, so that'll be
Good test.
a telling game, a good test right off the bat. So
Over in the wide receiving room, Packers opt to keep. I was going to say retain, but we'll just go with keep. Packers are going to keep 6 wide receivers. Not a lot of surprises here. Your top 5 being Dobbs, Watson, Reed, Wicks, and Heath, I think, is probably the main 5 that I would have put a lock on. Bold Melton's a little bit of a surprise. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm well
mhm.
aware of what he did late last season and how he contributed, and especially in the game against Dallas. But what didn't he have a touchdown against the 49ers as well? Wasn't that him like in the
I believe
yeah,
so, yeah.
so I'm not surprised by seeing his name necessarily on the 53-man roster, but Grant Dubois had that breakout game or a really solid game in week 1 of the preseason, while Bo Melton had the worst game of preseason in week 1. And we just saw kind of maybe a peak at the right time moment with these 2 particular wide receivers. Samari Toure is another one where he made the original wide receiving roster last season. Unfortunately, he gets cut. I would like to see Dubois and Toure obviously come back to the practice squad if available. But Malik Heath had some great showings, not only against Denver a few weeks ago, where they put up 0 points on offense, but he was one of the better players on that offense. And then against the Ravens, he had a pretty solid game too. So glad to see Malik Heath on the roster. Bo Melton, I mean, he's kind of like the Jeff Janis of this time day and age. He's that Americans darling, the Packers darling, where you love to see his name come up and contribute to the roster. Keeping 6 wide receivers. That's we're gonna get to tight ends where we're keeping 3 running backs, 6 wide receivers. I'm a little bit surprised. I thought we might hang on to that 7th wide receiver ultimately, but here we have it. That's our lineup. Not a lot of change year over year. These names are going to be pretty familiar for Packers fans returning from the 23 season. Anybody that you wish would have swapped roles, or is this kind of what you were expecting overall?
No, this is what I was expecting. I agree with you that it is slightly a surprise that Bo Melton made the roster compared to those other 2 guys right at the top of the released list, DeBose and Toure, with Melton's performance throughout the preseason. It wouldn't have been surprising to see him on the other side of things and one of those 2 guys on the roster. So it's a slight surprise, but overall, not very surprising to see who made the roster in this wide receiver room.
Yeah, and this is
It's we've been talking about it all off season. It's a solid wide receiver room. We're gonna get good production out of all of these guys. So
yeah, this is actually it's Bo Melton's 3rd season on the Packers roster. It's his first time actually making the initial 53-man roster. And to that point, I think a Grant DeVoe and a Samori Toure, they've probably come back to the practice squad and they will very well have opportunities. We still don't know what we have in Christian Watson health wise. Knock on wood, I want the guy to be healthy, but his track record says that there's potential that he could be hurt at some point out in the season. So even if you're not on that initial 53-man roster, I think any of these 8 gentlemen could definitely be a person that steps in somewhere along the season. I don't really see anything from Hicks, Stanley, and Wayne. Didn't really hear their names pop a whole lot. You can probably think, if I'm those 3 guys, I'm probably looking at Clifford and Pratt and saying, fuck you. You cost me a job in the NFL. On to the tight ends. No surprises really here either. We finally are going to get Luke Musgrave back and healthy after being out for close to half a season last year. Keeping 3 tight ends. They released, or not released, but put Tyler Davis on the injured reserve, and then a couple other names in there that just apparently didn't find a role on special teams. What I'll say about the tight ends on this one is I hear a lot of Packer fans saying that Musgrave being back and healthy is going to be maybe the clear favorite for tight end. I'm kind of on the other camp. I do like Musgrave. I have nothing against him, but I'm leaning more towards Kraft being the main contributor. And the fact that I'm even making this argument is a good thing if we're Packers fans. It's not too different from the wide receiving competition. To have 2 talented up and coming receivers, tight ends, is definitely a good problem to have. I think Kraft showed a lot of growth while Musgrave went down last season. It was kind of his chance to shine, and he stepped up in a couple different facets. I'm excited to have both these guys on the roster. I'm excited to see what they both can do when healthy. But I would say keep an eye out on Kraft. I think he's going to be the one that slightly emerges in the tight end battle.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I can see that happening. Early on in training camp, I remember seeing, don't know which coach said it, might have been LaFleur, but there was a notification or a comment about those 2 tight ends and how they're really interchangeable. It doesn't matter which one is on the field. They can run the same plays. If the tight end is the first read for Jordan Love, it doesn't matter if it's Musgrave or Kraft. They trust him to be that number 1 read for that play. So it's very easy to see Kraft being the guy that stands out, but they very well may be neck and neck through the season. And I know I've commented before, you can run a 2 tight end set and have 2 guys out there that basically are wide receivers.
Right.
When usually on a team, you've got a tight end that's the pass catching tight end, and you got the tight end that's the blocking tight end, and you swap them out depending on what type of play you're running. With 2 guys that are really interchangeable, and both of them can be pass catching guys, or both of them could be run blocking guys, defenses aren't going to know what to do. So like your comparison to the wide receiver core on the Packers roster, it's going to be a different guy each week that has a big game, but it could be either one of them.
Yeah, and as soon as you start to scheme, if you're a defense, as soon as you start to scheme against one of them, there's just the other one that's probably going to have that breakaway game. Offensive line, 10 members stay on the offensive line. A couple of things that I kind of digested on this particular selection of players was that we have 5 returning players: Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom, and Sean Runyon. And then if you want to count Kadeem Telford, he did not make the initial 53-man roster, but he was part of the Packers program last season. He now makes the initial roster. So that gives us 6 returning players out of the 10. I don't know if you know this or not, but there's only 5 offensive linemen that line up. So we're going to have kind of there's a new, I guess, group behind what we had for returning players last season. Now, I really love our 5 offensive linemen that we have, and we'll see what Jordan Morgan does and how he integrates into that offensive line and earns his spot being the first round pick for the Packers. But we're looking at 3 rookies making this offensive line in the initial 53. That would be obviously Jordan Morgan, who we just discussed, Jacob Monk, and then Travis Glover. Those 2 being later 5th and I believe 6th round draft picks. And then we bring in a veteran in Andre Dillard. That one was a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't like the Dillard signing when it happened in the offseason. He's a veteran that had kind of up and down years in Tennessee. I thought he would come to the Packers and I guess compete, sure, but be more of a body for different activities and going through training camp and be there to help out. But sure enough, the Packers must have liked him enough and seen enough in him that they brought him back to the roster. Royce Newman, a familiar name and not necessarily a name that a lot of Packers people like. He does get released in the lineup. And then Caleb Jones is the other one that stands out a little bit. I do like how the Packers kind of lay these out by maybe talent level to an extent, but Caleb Jones being the second name on that list to be released. He had a pretty solid preseason. Although I don't see the Packers bringing Royce Newman back to the practice squad, I do anticipate and hope that they can bring Caleb Jones back. We're rolling with 10 offensive linemen. What are your thoughts with the amount of youth that we have behind our returning 5, 6 guys from last season? It's going to be inevitable, kind of like injuries maybe at wide receiver or other positions on the roster. I imagine one of these other young players are going to have to step up at some point.
It's interesting. I mean, youth can be a good thing on the offensive line. You got guys that are, you're not going to get injured, hopefully, as much. But on that offensive line, veteran guys are what you want. So it is interesting how young that offensive line is with, like you said, 3 rookies making the roster. Hopefully they know what they're doing and what they've got with these younger guys.
Work out really
But
well in our, I mean,
right.
if these 3, I think we know Jordan Morgan has obviously the highest ceiling or the most potential out of these 3, but just from where they're drafted. But if the Packers can get away with keeping 3 rookies on this roster, protecting, our $220 million
Mhm.
quarterback, you can carry that another season, another off season, another training camp. You could be set here at offensive line for 3, 4 years, which is a beautiful commodity to have, where you don't have to spend your draft picks going after the offensive line like they did this last year. Obviously, that's every GM's and every team's hope and goal is that every single draft player will stick, but it sure would be nice. And if these guys can continue to grow, learn together, and be a foundation in the future, and that way we can spend our second and third round picks next year on a backup quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a must next year.
Moving outside of offensive linemen, I believe we transitioned to the defense. We're looking at Preston Smith, Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Ongambare, Bretton Cox Jr., and Aaron Mosby is probably the biggest surprise. If you really want to call it a surprise, Mosby had back-to-back plays against the Ravens where he not only had an interception, but a strip sack fumble on the quarterback that led to a touchdown. So I think he's probably the player in preseason that stood out the most that actually made the roster, because there's a player by the name of Anthony Johnson Jr. who I thought stood out very well in preseason that did not make the roster. We'll get to him when we get to the defensive backs. Not a lot of names on the defensive end side of the roster that got cut. So unless you got any insight or feeling on that, it kind of seemed like that specific position was kind of locked up for the most part.
Yeah, the Aaron Mosby making the roster. I mean, you can't say that preseason games don't make a difference. Obviously, he performed well, and that definitely contributed to him making the roster. So, I mean, I don't have a lot of insight into the rest of this section.
There's
The,
not much to talk about
I
in this
mean,
section, really, because
no, you're gonna have Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness. The other guys are maybe mix in once in a while. Same thing with the D tackles. You got the top 3 guys.
right.
The other 2 may work in, and you never know. I mean, injuries happen all the time, so we may end up seeing some of these guys more than we expect to. But again, no surprises here.
To your point, defensive tackle, we kind of knew what we had there. I've heard a lot of great things about TJ Slayton throughout training camp,
Hmm.
that he's had a great camp and can be a solid addition right there with Kenny Clark. Vontae Wyatt, I believe, is coming into his second season. Another one of those Georgia boys, comes from a pedigree of winning culture. And so I'm excited to see what these 3 guys can do. Locking up Kenny Clark on the extension that we did. Our defensive tackle position is rock solid. Our defensive end position has a lot of possibility and potential, and I'd like to say rock solid as well. At the end of the day, these guys have to stop the run. So hopefully, Halfley can get that figured out with the scheme. But it seems like from a player talent perspective that there are players here that are going to be capable enough to stop the run. And they're going to get tested right away in week 1 when it comes to trying to stop Saquon Barkley and that Philadelphia Eagles team.
That Eagles team is going to be tough.
Yeah, we'll get to that next week. All right. Inside linebacker, Quay Walker, McDuffie are going to be your starters. So that's no surprise. That's kind of what's been going on throughout training camp. Eric Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper, and Tyron Hopper, 2 additional draft picks in this last year's draft, make the roster. They released Christian Welch. Now, this is the one that's kind of making the waves from Packers fans. A lot of people felt like Christian Welch had an outstanding preseason. I don't disagree with it necessarily. He had 2 interceptions in the last 2 games, excuse me. But as you kind of narrow down and cherry pick where you want these players to fall, maybe he didn't step up enough for a special teams role. Who's really to say? But that's probably the biggest surprise inside linebacker for those of that, were religiously watching these preseason games and hoping to have a new darling from the preseason step forward. I like what we have at inside linebacker. Biggest question mark for me is, will Quay Walker now take that jump? It's his 3rd season, right? Does that sound right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that sounds right.
is he gonna now? It's now kind of that make it or break it as far as what does his future kind of hold. The first year he struggled with some character issues at the tail end of the season. I think last year he dealt a little bit more with injuries. Now that 3rd season, can he step forward? Can he be that force that we need? We're not going to probably hear a whole lot from Edgerrin Cooper early on. He's been pretty quiet. Actually, he's been absent the entire preseason. He didn't play a whole lot if all in these preseason games. So we have these shiny new toys at draft picks that we don't know anything about. So we're just going to roll in with our team from last year and just see what happens, quite frankly.
It is a little frustrating that not getting to see these highlighted draft picks, the ones that everyone wanted to see in the preseason. Yeah, we didn't get to see them at all. So it is a little frustrating as a fan. I mean, like I've said before, we don't see what the coaches see on the practice field all the time or in the locker room. So hopefully they know something that we don't. Quay Walker, I mean, him making that step forward, I really believe he can. I think I mean, his talent is there. His production is there. He's had the attitude issues, the mental mistakes. But I said it a couple weeks ago. I think Halfley's the guy that can hopefully rein that in and really get the most out of Quay Walker. So I I really hope to see that. And then Edgerrin Cooper, there's a lot of comparisons to Quay Walker.
Right.
So I know we didn't see a lot of him and we may not see him early on in the first few weeks of the season, but hopefully he gets healthy and then starts making his way up that depth chart and we do see more of him cuz I mean, with the talent that Quay Walker has, we know he's good. We know he's a good inside linebacker. And if Edgerrin Cooper is just as good, if we can get them both on the field next to each other, running on all cylinders and dialed in, it could be fun to watch.
Is there any chance that like Cooper or Hopper look like Ray Lewis or anything like that? Have you heard anything in the circles that no,
Mm,
no Ray Lewis,
I don't think
no Terry
I
Tate
don't know
office
if there's
linebacker?
many. I don't know if there's many players that can compare to Ray
I
Lewis.
know. Damn it.
He's kind of in a league of his own, but it's, I think the linebackers that the Packers have aren't necessarily that style of linebacker anyway. I think they're looking for these super fast, agile, sideline to sideline type
Right.
guys where guys like Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher were the punchy in the mouth, fill the hole, fill the gap, and blow up the play at the line of scrimmage. I think where Quay Walker and hopefully Edgerrin Cooper are going to shine are their ability to traverse the field so quickly and be a ball hawk,
Right.
always there, always in on the tackle. I think that's the type of player that they are compared to a Ray Lewis or a Brian Urlacher of old.
On the cornerback front, not a lot of changes there from names that we're used to seeing. Pretty much just a duplicate of what we saw last year. We're looking at Alexander Stokes, a
Mhm.
healthy Stokes, mind you, Nixon, Valentine, and Ballantyne. A little bit surprised. We're thin here, which tells me that they better have some plans to bring back some of these names to the practice squad. I am surprised. You alluded to it early on. It's like the players that got cut. Kalen King stood out to you. He also stood out to me too. I thought he looked really good in the final preseason game as a tackler. His effort seemed evident on the film to me. He's a player with a lot of upside. I'm not the Packers GM, so we've said this countless times. We're not seeing these guys every single day practice, but I hope he's a guy that
Mhm.
gets a shot to come back to the practice squad. I'd like him to go through another offseason program, another training camp and see if he can maybe overtake some of these other guys or come to his full potential. Or maybe he gets a shot throughout the season to step in, because we've seen injuries at this cornerback position quite frequently too. That's that's my biggest surprise in this group. Otherwise, it looks like the returning five are going to be, like I said, household names, names that we're used to seeing.
Yeah. Well, and looking at this in front of me, all these names in front of me, it was a difficult spot for Kalen King to
Oh yeah,
carve out a roster spot. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Valentine and Valentine. These guys are solid. Packers know what they got with them. They've been around for the last at least couple seasons. Stokes is probably the only one with question marks because he has been injured and we didn't see a ton of him over the last couple of years. But I feel like they have a lot of faith in him. Um, I'm a big Stokes fan. When he got drafted, I was excited about the draft pick. He's a super fast cornerback, which is what you need on the outside there. So a super difficult place for King to try and carve a roster spot out. But as you said, I feel like they bring him back to the practice squad. If injuries happen, he's going to get another opportunity. And if that's not when his opportunity comes, maybe next season. I don't think this is the last we see of Kalen King. But looking at it now, it was going to be really tough for him to crack that roster.
yeah, and being a seventh round pick like he was, I'd imagine that not many teams have
Mhm.
have him on their radar. They would have possibly drafted him if they really felt like he was the guy. So I feel confident enough that he's a guy that the Packers can bring back. Like I said, there's 16 players that they can bring back, plus the kicker if they ultimately decide to go that route. So hopefully he's a guy that gets another opportunity when the time comes around here. Safety position, gotta love. I mean,
The big one.
man, we heading into last season, we had really no idea what we had at safety position. This seems like now one of the more solid positions that we have in the entire roster, primarily because they invested in this. This was that one position that they invested in the entire offseason. So obviously McKinney's making the roster, Bullard being that second round pick, Williams, Zane Anderson, and Keaton Oladapo. Zane Anderson being the more of the special teams darling that made the roster. You're probably going to see his name a lot throughout that side of things. I am surprised looking at this, though. Alluded to it a little bit before. Anthony Johnson Jr. Let me back up a little bit. I didn't get a chance to watch the game, the Ravens game, live on Saturday. So I woke up. It was a replay on NFL Network Sunday morning. Made my coffee, watched the game. Was able to really kind of get into it, take some notes. I was ready to post and talk that he was my lock. That was my guy that he played with so much heart and so much effort. He had a touchdown on that scoop and score fumble. I thought that he would make this roster, but I again was humbled by Gutekunst and the way that they decided to shape this roster. He should be a practice guy, but if there's anybody on this roster that I see has the potential to get snatched up by another team, he's the one that stands out to me that he might get picked up by someone else, and the Packers might not get their chance to hang on to this guy.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I didn't get a chance to see much of the Ravens preseason game either, but you know, throughout the preseason, we've heard Johnson Jr.'s name. So it is interesting, but I mean, look at the other guys that are on the roster. McKinney obviously was a lock. Bullard performed well in training camp and throughout the preseason. Evan Williams was a name that stood out. You already commented that Anderson or Zane Anderson is a special teams guy, so he's not necessarily going to play much at that safety position, maybe. But and then Oladapo, that's the one that he was this year's draft pick. He had an injury, so that's a big reason why we didn't see a lot of him. So maybe the Packers just weren't ready to let him go because they drafted him for a reason. They drafted him because they saw something in him, but didn't get to see it throughout training camp or preseason. So maybe they just weren't ready to let it go. But I've definitely foresee if someone else does, another team doesn't scoop him up, Johnson on the practice squad, and if Oladapo doesn't pan out to be somebody that they can rely on, maybe those two swap places. Oladapo gets released and Johnson Jr. gets moved up to the active roster. some point this season.
It's definitely possible. So I want to pull up the last thing that we have here is the special teams. So before, I guess we'll touch on that real quick. I mean, we talked about kicking competition. That is what it is. We'll see how that pans out over the next couple of weeks. Dan Whelan, I believe it's Whelan. Pretty solid. I mean, he's a solid punter. I've been watching Hard Knocks since we last spoke, so I got caught up on the Chicago Bears Hard Knocks. They have one hell of a punter that they've got from Australia, I believe, is where they found this guy. He played a little bit of college football from coming from Australia. Bears picked him up. I think they got him in the 4th round of the draft this last offseason. So might have to fact check me on that one, but everything I was gathering, he was a 4th round punter that they drafted in the same draft. They took Caleb Williams and Odunze. Yes, I learned how to pronounce that too since our last video. That's a huge difference, that punter for the Bears and how they're going to be able to swap field position. And I think we have a solid one in Green Bay as well. Daniel Whelan seems to be a guy that we drafted him last year, not in the 4th round, but he's going to be a guy that continues to grow. I think he'll be on the roster for many years to come. Didn't have any competition against him for that specific reason. But I want to close out of this window here real quick and see if I can open up. So I have a side by side between the 23 initial 53-man roster and the 24. And just kind of going line by line, a lot of the things that stood out to me is that we're keeping the same amount of players at each position pretty consistently. It seems like the Packers know what they like to carry at any given moment. 2 quarterbacks, Jordan Love being the starter, looking at running back. I don't know how well you can see this, but Emmanuel Wilson is the only returning name at running back year over year, which is a little bit surprising. The wide receiving front, like we discussed, Samori Toure swaps out with Bo Melton, but otherwise we keep 6 receivers again. Musgrave, Kraft being the top 2 tight ends. So we're getting a lot of return on tight end, just swapping out Ben Sims with DeGuara. Offensive line, we discussed that. Just a bunch of young faces. No David Bakhtiar anymore. No Yash Nyman, who was kind of maybe a Aaron Rodgers darling that he felt would maybe be the best player on the offensive line, but never came to fruition. Maybe it's not an epiphany by any means, but to kind of see it in the flesh that we're bringing back essentially the same team that continued to grow week over week and has that same desire and urgency to prove themselves that even though they are a young team and possibly still the youngest team in the league, that they can go out there. I really like, I don't know. I guess I'm just really excited looking at our roster carryover and seeing the new additions. I think we got better year over year and we're going to win a Super Bowl. I'm just going to put it at that.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes back to, I think, maybe our first or second episode. We talked about the draft this year, and before you and I even started this thing, we talked about how on draft night, first round, you texted me and asked what I was hoping for out of the first round draft pick for the Packers. And even back then, I really couldn't think of a spot, especially on the offense, where we needed to draft some sort of first round talent.
Right.
So I think they did what they needed to in the draft, and I think they've brought guys in from other teams with their acquisitions that are going to be beneficial. Safety being one that we needed. Running back was, maybe not needed, but I think it's an upgrade. So it goes back
Clearly
to,
it was.
when we first started talking, clearly it was.
Yeah, running back was obviously needed based on where we sit right now.
Yeah, yeah. It goes back to that. We started out this off season with the thought that the team that we had last year was pretty solid and we didn't need to change a whole lot, and they didn't. They really didn't change much compared to last year. So, like I said before, hopefully that means the success continues. We piggyback off of what they did to end the season last year and just keep moving forward. That's what anybody can hope for.
We've pretty much summed up the entire Packers roster, talked about our surprises, about what we see coming up in the upcoming season. We're an hour, 5 minutes into this thing. You got any more dad jokes you want to talk about, or you got any other topics that you want to run by? As I mentioned, I started watching the Hard Knocks Chicago Bears, and I have a different view on Caleb Williams for 2 reasons. The first thing being that I get my hair cut by a Chicago Bears fan, so I had to listen to him talk about him for 20 minutes. I mean, look at it though. He does great work. All right. Second thing though, I actually watched Hard Knocks. You know the whole, fake news thing that is, circulating in the world that we live in. I think you have to listen to Caleb Williams and actually get to know the guy. Maybe it's the Aaron Rodgers effect, quite frankly, because we're Packer fans. He used to go on Pat McAfee, and I don't know. I was always like, dude, he's super entertaining. He's a fun guy to watch. You just have to listen to him, ignore all the drama. I like God damn it. I like Caleb Williams. I actually like the guy.
Oh,
I hate that I
no.
like the guy. I want him to fail miserably, but I like the guy. He's humble. He's down to earth. He understands that he was brought into Chicago to change the franchise. Of course he was. He was the first overall pick. He's brought in to change shit. He knows it. I don't know. I like the way he carries himself. I fucking can't wait till he fails, but I think he's actually a pretty good guy, is what I'm getting at. And you have to.
All right, everyone. I apologize. This is turning into a Chicago Bears podcast.
Hey,
I will no longer be a part of it.
I took the Packers to win in week 1. You want to go back to that?
No, okay, that's fair. That's fair. I have not watched Hard Knocks. We'll see. But what my holdup is back during I brought it up last week, how at the NFL Combine, he showed up, but said, "Nah, I'm not gonna run any drills, not gonna do anything here at the Combine. I'm just here because the press wants to see me and the teams can see me at my pro day." And then I remember there being, something about his dad talking to the media and stuff like that. Whenever that happens, whenever there's a parent involved that's talking up their kid, always the greatest thing since sliced bread. Whenever there's a parent involved like that, it always seems like a bad situation. Like I think of Lamar Ball. That's exactly who I'm thinking of. That type of situation. Like his kids, Lamar Ball's kids, are very good basketball players, but none of them have panned out to be the next, big thing in the NBA. Yes, they're good players and they have their spots where they shine, but none of them have panned out to be anything super significant in the NBA. So that's what I see with this Caleb Williams situation. He's got his dad involved, talking to the media. He's showing up to the combine saying, I'm here just to show off, just to be like, oh, here I am. I'm going to be the first pick in the draft. I know it. Everyone else knows it, but I'm not going to throw, not going to do anything. Just that whole all that drama, all that talk, even what you saw, if I was to watch it, that would still be in the back of my mind. And I don't know that I can get on board.
All right. Well, regardless of whether you like him or not, I think this is going to be one of the better Bears teams that we've faced in the last 5 years. It's not going to be like a walk in the park
Oh yeah,
type
sure.
of game. I can see them splitting with Detroit. I can see them pushing us to having to freaking work our ass off to not lose to them. So I don't like what they're doing in Chicago, but I respect what they're doing in Chicago. It seems like seems like they're on a good trajectory. I don't necessarily need Chicago to suck forever. I don't need the Vikings to suck forever. But being the main headline, a huge storyline from the offseason and the type of caliber of player that they drafted as the number 1 overall pick, I don't know. I like the guy. He seems like he seems like a cool guy.
It may be a good thing for the Packers. It may be a good thing.
That's what we're gonna get.
If they're not gonna be
It's gonna be
if they're not gonna be
Caleb Williams and Jordan Love for like the next 5 to 10 years. That's the
Yeah,
matchup.
yeah. Well, and it's, in my opinion, it's better to play good competition as you move towards that postseason than it is to just roll over every team in your division, win the division, and then you get to the playoffs and you face these teams that have battled and grounded out to get there, and then you lose in the first round because you're just used to these pushover teams. You can't really compare high school football to the NFL. It's a whole nother level, but I see it in high school football too. Like, for example, so my hometown, Rice Lake. So when I was in high school, we played in a Division 1 conference. But then if we got to playoffs, we dropped down to Division 3 based on our school size. Well, if we were to make it to playoffs, we rolled through the playoffs because of the competition that we played throughout the whole season. So you look at it at the NFL level, if the Packers are playing better competition in the NFC North with the Lions being a solid team and a Super Bowl contender and the Bears being on their way up, Vikings are probably still a little bit of a
That's
rollover
bad.
team. But yeah, with better competition comes more experience, more tenacity once you get to the further levels of the season. So it very well may be a good thing that the Bears are kind of stepping it up.
Well, we don't have a lot of like those Tom Brady, Peyton Manning duels of the past were classics, and maybe the closest thing we
Mhm.
have of that today is like Mahomes and Burrow might be the closest thing that we get to that.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of those
Josh Allen. Josh Allen Mahomes is probably the best one right
right
now, I
there.
would
Yeah,
say.
because they had that just crazy playoff game, a few years ago.
One of the best games
Yeah.
I've ever watched. It was so much fun.
So if Caleb Williams can turn out to be as good as he is, and you have this saga over the next 5 to 10 years of Love versus Williams and the third in line franchise quarterback in Green Bay versus the first star quarterback the Bears have ever had, because they've never had a quarterback throw for more than 4,000 yards. So this could be their guy to do it. It could be,
Isn't that
it's
insane?
just nuts to me.
That's
Yeah.
insane.
And that's hard to believe because Jay Cutler wasn't that bad. You'd think he would have thrown for 4,000 yards. Didn't he have he had Marshawn or what who's the guy that you want to talk about? Brandon Marshall,
Brandon
yeah.
Marshall?
Wasn't
Yeah,
he one of the wide
I was gonna
receivers of
say
Jay Cutler?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's funny that you bring up Jay Cutler because almost a week ago now, I was just scrolling through. I don't know if I was on Facebook or Twitter or what it was, but I saw this comment from Brandon Marshall, former NFL wide receiver. So I believe he started with the Jets, but he was with the Chicago Bears for a significant amount of time. But he was asked what he thinks about the new Chicago Bears team with Caleb Williams, the rookie wide receiver, the new wide receivers, running backs, this new revamped offense for the Bears. And this was his comment. He said, "Look, I will always love the Bears and thank them for everything that they've done for me. They have a great team like we did when we had me, Matt Forte, Alshon Jeffrey, but this current Bears team has another Jay Cutler at QB, unfortunately." So, one, that's telling on what he thought of Jay Cutler. I despised Jay Cutler when he was especially since the Packers played him
Yeah.
2 times a year.
He had that neck
I always
twitch.
saw him as he always seemed really whiny, and I don't know. I just didn't like him for whatever reason, but it looks like Brandon Marshall didn't like him too much either, and apparently Brandon Marshall thinks that's what they have in Caleb Williams now too. So that those Bears teams with Jay Cutler weren't necessarily bad teams. I mean, Jay Cutler wasn't a bad quarterback. He produced and gosh, I don't even know. I'd have to look up how many times Jay Cutler made it to the playoffs even, but never Super Bowl caliber team. So maybe that's kind of what Brandon Marshall is saying. They've got a decent team now, but not a team that he thinks is going to push the Bears over that hump and get back to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, the most yards Cutler threw for was 3,600 yards back in 2015. That was oh no, wait. Oh, he threw for 4,500 when he in his last season in Denver, and then he went to the Bears and they
Oh,
didn't throw for 4,000. I think that's funny. Yeah. Well, any other musings or thoughts you'd like to ramble on about as we wrap up this video?
hmm.
We got to dive into Philadelphia next weekend.
Yeah, we'll talk much about that next week. I'll come prepared for sure because that's gonna be man, that Eagles team's gonna be good. The more I think about it, the more I'm worried about them as a Super Bowl competitor in the NFC. They're going to be good.
Nah.
Not as good as the Green Bay
Oh,
Packers, though. Obviously.
yeah, I'll have to dive into them as well. I mean, I know they're one of many teams. We talked last week about, do you play your starters in the third preseason game?
Hmm.
The Packers didn't. The Detroit Lions did not play any of their starters throughout the entire preseason. The Eagles did not play any of their starters throughout the entire preseason. So, yeah, the Packers might have 3 snaps on offense, but it's going to be we don't really know. There could be a lot of rust in that first game. It's going to be interesting to see
Hmm.
what we actually get. We'll break it down next week. So if you want to hear our thoughts on the breakdown and our predictions and what to watch and maybe a potential dad joke next week in our week 1
Yes.
coverage of the Packers regular season, subscribe, comment down below, subscribe to the content, follow us on TikTok. I don't think we got anything else to discuss in this video. Am I right?
I will come prepared next week with a dad joke.
Oh, good.
I'm not going to say the best dad joke. I might need to save that for later in the season, but I will come with a dad joke next week. Another thing that I will ask that we get some comments on. So I run, of the many fantasy football leagues that I'm in, I run one of them. I'm the commissioner of one of them. And currently we are trying to figure out what the punishment should be for last place in our fantasy league. I've come up with some ideas. I've seen some stuff online. I am interested to see what our viewers think should be the punishment for our fantasy football league. Nothing is off the table. Let's get weird with it, right?
You have to get weird with it. That's the whole point. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Have you ever finished last in fantasy?
Probably. Not that I can remember. I've gotten close. I've gotten very close to last place. But I always, if I'm in that, that loser's bracket at the end, I'm always like scratching and clawing to make sure that I don't lose that last matchup to take last place. Some people may just, after they don't make playoffs, just don't even
Yeah,
pay attention to
this
it.
guy.
But yeah, even if there's not a punishment in my league, I still don't want to be last place. So I don't think that I have. Don't quote me though. It maybe happened once or twice, but yeah, I try not to.
Any final thoughts on the roster breakdown? I personally don't have a ton. I think as we discussed, the roster got better. I think they made some tough decisions across the board. I think there's some players that we'll have on the practice squad, but we're going to see a lot of what we saw last year, just 2.0 is kind of where I stand with it.
Hmm.
And hopefully that works out in our favor.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm happy with it. I'm honestly happy with it. I was super optimistic last season with it being Jordan Love's first year as a starter and how young the team was. I've always thought that it was a good call to move on from Rodgers, bring Love in with these young receivers and have them all develop together. So very excited to see that development continue. Yeah, I'm happy with it, and let's get on to some regular season
Oh,
football.
it's here. It is here. So until next time, are you out?
Oh yeah, I've been out. I drank
I bring
real
a lot of
fast
beer.
tonight for some
So
reason.
until next time, I will see you. We will see you. Got to get used to saying that on the internet. Thanks for watching.
On the internet.